The cabin looked exactly like power was supposed to look. Wide leather seats curved gently around polished armrests. Soft golden lights glowed above, warm enough to feel welcoming, dim enough to feel exclusive. Crystal glasses rested on linen napkins. The air smelled faintly of citrus wipes and expensive perfume. First class was quiet, not because people had nothing to say, but because they believed their words mattered more when spoken softly. Margaret Johnson adjusted the collar of her coat and smiled at her husband. "Can you believe this?" she whispered. "First class, at our age." Harold Johnson chuckled, his deep voice calm and steady. "We earned it, Maggie." They had planned this trip for months. A visit to their granddaughter, college graduation, first in the family. Margaret had cried when the acceptance letter arrived. Harold had framed it. Now they sat side by side in the front cabin of the plane, hands resting close, their fingers brushing every few seconds like muscle memory. Harold wore a neatly pressed gray blazer. Margaret's silver hair was pulled back carefully, pearl earrings catching the light whenever she turned her head. They looked comfortable, they looked dignified, they looked like they belonged. But belonging, they had learned, was rarely decided by effort. Across the aisle, a young woman in a tailored navy uniform stopped mid-stride. Her name tag read Emily. She held a tablet against her chest and stared at the Johnsons for just a moment too long. Not confusion, not curiosity, assessment. Her lips tightened into a professional smile as she stepped closer. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice smooth but sharp around the edges. "May I see your boarding passes?" Harold blinked. Of course. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, as if moving too fast might invite suspicion. Margaret did the same, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled the paper free. Emily took the passes, her eyes scanned them, then scanned them again. Her smile faded. "I'm sorry," she said, glancing between the two of them. "There seems to be a problem." Margaret frowned. "A problem?" "Yes," Emily replied. "These seats are part of our first-class cabin." Harold nodded. "Yes, we know." Emily tilted her head. "Are you sure you're in the correct section?" Margaret let out a small, nervous laugh. "We followed the signs." Emily's gaze hardened. "These seats are typically reserved for our premium passengers." Harold's jaw tightened. "We are premium passengers," he said calmly. Emily pressed her lips together. "According to my system, you paid for these seats," Margaret interrupted, her voice polite but firm. "Full price." Emily's eyes flicked toward the cockpit, then back to them. "Sometimes passengers are mistakenly seated here," she said. "I'll need you to relocate to economy while we sort this out." The words landed heavy. Relocate. Margaret felt heat crawl up her neck. "We're not mistaken." Emily's tone sharpened. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." That sentence, that exact sentence. Harold slowly straightened in his seat. "We've done nothing wrong." A man in the row ahead leaned back, glancing over his shoulder. Another passenger removed one earbud. Silence spread like spilled ink. Emily straightened her shoulders. "Sir, if you refuse to comply, I'll have to escalate this." Margaret's heart pounded. She had lived through too many moments like this. Department stores, hotels, hospitals, always polite, always calm, always required to prove something invisible. "We just want to sit," Margaret said softly. Emily tapped her tablet again, though it was clear she wasn't actually checking anything. "That won't be possible," she said. A white-haired man across the aisle scoffed. "First class is for people who pay," he muttered. Harold turned to him. "We did." The man looked away. Emily exhaled sharply. "I'm calling my supervisor." She walked off, heels clicking sharply against the aisle floor, leaving behind a cabin that suddenly felt much smaller. Margaret reached for Harold's hand. "Maybe we should just move," she whispered. "I don't want trouble." Harold squeezed her fingers. "We're not the trouble." Minutes passed. Whispers followed. Then Emily returned, this time with a senior flight attendant and a man in a dark suit. An air marshal. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The senior attendant cleared his throat. "Sir, ma'am, we're being told there's an issue with your seating." "There isn't," Harold said. "You can scan the passes." Emily crossed her arms. "They're refusing to cooperate." Margaret looked at her in disbelief. "We're sitting." "That's the problem," Emily snapped. A voice suddenly rang out from the front row. "I own this airline. a well-dressed executive barked, standing halfway from his seat. "And I don't want them here." The cabin froze. Margaret stared at him, stunned. Harold rose slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You don't own us," he said quietly. The Air Marshal stepped forward. "Sir, please stand." "For what?" Harold asked. "So we can resolve this situation." "You already can," Harold replied. "Scan the ticket." The executive scoffed. "They're causing a disturbance." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear, but from humiliation. Hands closed around Harold's arm. "No," Margaret cried. "Please." A woman a few rows back stood. "I saw their boarding passes. They're first class." Emily snapped. "Ma'am, sit down." Another voice joined in. "This isn't right." The air marshal hesitated. The senior attendant finally took the passes and scanned them. A beep. Green. Silence. The executive's face flushed. Well, they still caused the scene. Harold looked him in the eye. "No, you did." The captain appeared. "What's happening?" The senior attendant swallowed. "We made an error." The captain turned to the Johnsons. "I sincerely apologize." Margaret wiped her eyes. Harold took a deep breath. "No," Harold said. "We're not sitting back down." The cabin stilled. "We paid," he continued. "We belonged, and you still decided we didn't." Margaret stood beside him, her back straight despite her shaking hands. "We're leaving," she said, "but you'll remember this." As they walked down the aisle, eyes followed them, some ashamed, some silent, some still convinced. The plane did not move, because sometimes the delay isn't weather, it's truth. And truth doesn't stay seated when it's told. It doesn't belong. The jet bridge felt colder than the cabin, not because of the air, but because of what had just happened inside. Margaret walked slowly, each step careful, deliberate. Her knees ached, but she refused to let it show. Harold stayed close beside her, his hand hovering near her elbows to guide her, but to reassure himself she was still there, still steady, still dignified. Behind them, the aircraft door closed with a hollow thud. It sounded final. Margaret stopped near the large window overlooking the runway. Planes rolled past like obedient machines, moving when told, stopping when ordered. She watched one lift into the sky and felt a strange tightening in her chest. "I thought we were past this," she said quietly. Harold didn't answer right away. He was staring at his reflection in the glass, an older black man in a tailored coat, posture straight, eyes tired but unbroken. "They told us that every decade," he said finally. "Past it. Fixed. Better now." Margaret let out a small, humorless laugh. "Better for who?" A gate supervisor approached. Her expression strained, rehearsed concern etched across her face. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, we are so sorry for what happened," she said quickly. "This does not reflect our values. We'd be happy to rebook you immediately. First class, complimentary." Margaret turned to her. "You've already showed us your values." The supervisor blinked, unprepared for that. Harold nodded. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." The woman swallowed. "We'll be conducting an internal review." Margaret's eyes softened not with forgiveness, but with fatigue. Reviews don't erase humiliation. A few feet away, a young airline employee stood frozen behind the counter. She couldn't have been more than 21. Her hands trembled as she pretended to organize papers she didn't need to touch. She had watched everything from the first request for boarding passes to the final walk down the aisle. She had never seen racism wear such a calm face before. When Margaret noticed her staring, the young woman flushed. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, stepping forward. "I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve that." Margaret studied her face, searching for something real. "Thank you for saying it," she replied. "Just don't forget it." The girl nodded quickly, eyes wet. Inside the plane, the atmosphere had shifted. The luxury no longer felt indulgent. It felt exposed. Passengers avoided one another's eyes. The man who had muttered earlier stared at the seat back in front of him, jaw clenched. The executive who claimed ownership sat rigidly, pretending to scroll through his phone, though his screen remained dark. Emily stood near the galley, arms crossed tightly, replaying the scene in her mind. She told herself she had followed protocol, but the truth pressed in anyway. She had assumed she had seen two elderly black passengers in first class, and felt something itch behind her professionalism, something she had never been trained to question. The green light from the scanner haunted her. The captain's voice eventually came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We experienced an internal matter that required resolution. We'll be departing shortly." Internal matter. No mention of names. No mention of harm. Just another delay to be forgotten. Except it wouldn't be. Margaret and Harold sat together at a quiet cafe in the terminal. 2 cups of coffee cooled between them, untouched. People passed by without recognizing them, without knowing that minutes earlier they had been the center of something ugly and undeniable. Margaret finally picked up her cup, then set it down again. "I was scared," she admitted. Harold reached for her hand. "I know, not of them," she continued. "Of staying quiet. Of letting it slide. Of teaching our granddaughter that dignity is negotiable." Harold squeezed her fingers. "You taught her something better?" Across the terminal, phones buzzed. A passenger had posted. Another had commented. The story began to move, quiet at first, then faster. An elderly black couple, first class, removed. Boarding passes, valid. People argued online, as they always did. Some denied it, some minimized it, some blamed procedure, but the facts didn't bend. Later that evening, Margaret's phone rang. "Their daughter?" "I saw it," she said, voice shaking. "I'm so proud of you." Margaret closed her eyes, tears finally spilling free. "We were just trying to sit. That's the point," her daughter replied. Hours later, on another flight, another airline, Margaret hesitated before settling into her seat. This time, no one questioned her. No one asked twice. The flight attendant smiled warmly. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Margaret glanced at Harold. He smiled back. "Just water, please." As the plane ascended, Margaret looked out the window. Clouds stretched endlessly, soft and indifferent, untouched by prejudice or permission. She thought about all the years she had spent shrinking herself, speaking softer, smiling wider, making room. She thought about the moment Emily said, "You can't sit here," and how she had stayed anyway, until she didn't. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Margaret leaned her head against Harold's shoulder. "Do you think it mattered?" she asked quietly. Harold didn't hesitate. It always does. Somewhere, a flight attendant would hesitate next time. Somewhere, a passenger would speak up sooner. Somewhere, a young employee would remember that green light and trust evidence over instinct. And somewhere, an elderly couple would sit down without having to prove they belonged, because racism didn't need shouting. Sometimes, it only needed a seat number and the audacity to decide who deserved it.